Hello everyone and welcome back to Cooking with Suzanne. So today we're going to make a pot of soup. I'd like to share with you my recipe for French onion soup. And it's really all about caramelizing your onions. There are very few ingredients in making a good French onion soup, which I know many of us really do enjoy. So I just want to talk about the onions. These are Vidalia onions, which are very readily available right now. They are in season, they're sweet and delicious. And I have about 10 cups of sliced onions, thinly sliced onions. So all you want to do is just cut your onion in half. It's really important when you go ahead to slice that you have a good flat surface. So the first thing you want to do is take out the root out of the onion, and then you just want to have a nice flat surface so that when you start slicing it won't roll around on you, which is very important. And then just go ahead and thinly slice your onion, and when you get close and you can't go any further, take your onion and flatten it out again. So then this way here you're able to have a good flat surface again. So here we have all of our onions. 10 very packed cups of onion. This took about, I would say I had about eight or nine medium onions to get this 10 cups. So I have a large saute pan here, and I put a couple of tablespoons of butter. You can also use olive oil if you prefer. I'm going to use a little bit of butter here. And it is important, just get the butter in there, it is important to add salt to your onions right away, and that is to help release the water out of your onions. So I do have some kosher salt here, and as soon as we get the onions in, we will go ahead and season them right away. This is the most important thing to know about making French onion soup is just that you need time. As far as ingredients go, it doesn't take much. Once your onions are sliced, the rest of the work, it's done. It's more about taking the time to caramelize your onions properly. So my butter is nicely melted. And now I'll put my onions in. I'm going to leave it on high for a couple of minutes until the onions get nice and warm and they're the same temperature as the pan, so that when I go ahead and lower the heat, it will continue to cook. If I lower the heat right now, the onions are very cold. Lowering the heat will also make the pan get cold, so you don't want to do that yet. You want to be patient and wait a little bit. If you take notice, I have two saute pans on the stove. I have my large one, but then I also have a smaller one. As these onions, as the water gets released and the onions start to shrink, when it gets to a certain point, you're going to want to change it and put it in a smaller pan. You don't want to leave your onions in a large pan with a lot of space in it, because then what will happen is your onions will burn instead of caramelize, and you don't want that to happen either. So when we get to that step, I will show you. In the meantime, let me just stir the onions a little bit, and I will salt them, and then we can lower the heat. I think if you're able to hear it, it actually got very, very quiet just now. And the reason is because of the cold onions. So you want to get it back to where you can still hear it working before you lower your heat. And that was just from stirring it around a little bit. So besides our onions, what else do we need? You can either use beef stock if you want a very nice rich flavor, or you can use chicken stock and it will be a lighter flavor. For the summertime, you could certainly go with chicken stock. In the fall, winter, I would most definitely go with beef, but I love that rich flavor. And I'm going to add some wine to this, so I'm going to go ahead and use beef stock here. But you are more than welcome to choose between the two. They are both very, very good. So what I have here is 1 cup of port. The port will help give more richness to your broth. It will also add a hint of sweetness to the broth and to the onions, so it's really nice. And I have some white wine. You can use Riesling, you can use a Sauvignon Blanc, but you want to add the acidity. It needs a little bit of acidity. If you choose not to put any wine in your soup, you don't have to. You can take this out, but at the very end, when you finish your soup, you'll want to add either a little bit of sherry vinegar or a little bit of red wine vinegar to bring out a little bit of acidity into the soup to kind of balance it all out, okay? So I can hear this is still working very nicely, trying to release the water, so I'm still keeping it on high right now. I'm going to take a teaspoon of kosher salt and add it to our onions. Maybe another little half a teaspoon, so about a teaspoon and a half. It's still fairly quiet, so I'm not going to reduce the heat yet. Let's just give this another stir. And in regard to your stock, speaking of salt, you want to have a low salt stock. If you're going to buy your stock rather than make it, if you're going to get beef, either get completely unsalted or 50% less salt, and the same holds true for chicken stock. If you're not going to make it, be sure to buy a lower salt, and you can control how much salt you want in your soup. So that's very important, because otherwise it may get too salty, because it is going to reduce a little bit. Once we add our stock to the onions, we're going to let that cook for an hour, and it will reduce, which means also the salt will get a little bit stronger. So you want to be careful with that, and you definitely use the low salt stock. Okay. This is doing very well. I'm still not lowering it yet. I'm waiting for some of the water to reduce. I would say you would like to keep it on high here. I would say for about 8 to 10 minutes. Then you're going to lower it as low as you can get it and stir it often. I would say every 20 minutes or so you want to go in and stir it. And we'll check it every hour. I'll come back to you every hour so that you can see how the onions are coming along. This is going to take about 3 hours if you want to really caramelize your onions properly. So I will, in about 2 more minutes, I'm going to lower it. But the other thing that we want to talk about as far as ingredients goes is in regard to the stock, you would want about 3 quarts, so about 12 cups. Depending on how much water is in the onion and how much it's going to shrink and reduce will depend really how much stock you're going to need. We'll start with the 12 cups. We may need less, we may need more. Once our onions are close to being ready and they're almost completely caramelized, and by the way, I can hear that it's getting louder behind me, which means that the water is definitely reducing, and now is a good time to lower it. So always listen for that. I can definitely hear it's getting louder. So now I'm going to lower the heat as low as I can get it. I'll just give this one more stir. And you want to not cover this because we are looking to get color on our onions. We're looking to caramelize them. So don't cover them, but keep your flame as low as you can get it. So every 15 minutes, I'll check back with you in an hour so that you can see what the onions look like. Okay, see you in a little bit. So welcome back. Our 1 hour timer just went off, so I'm going to grab our onions and we can take a look at them together. So I want you to be able to see how there is steam coming off and there's tiny little bubbles happening here, but you can see that the onions are not sticking and they are not caramelizing yet. They're releasing all of the water and they're creating this incredible amount of flavor in the onions as they're cooking very slowly. So I think you can also see here the volume of the onions. It is probably less than 50%. So now is when we will transfer these onions to a smaller pan because this is too large now. And just transfer the onions to this pan, which, by the way, I did put the pan on very, very low heat, the same heat that this pan was on, so that it could heat up before I go ahead and add the onions. I don't want the onions to stop cooking. So this smaller pan was on very low heat. So I will show you how the amount of onions now fits into this pan. So now we will continue to cook this, stirring it every 15-20 minutes, making sure that it's not sticking anywhere. If it is, you're picking it up out of the bottom and kind of rotating your onions very nicely for another 2 hours. So I will do this now for 2 more hours, which would give us a total of 3 hours of cooking. Then we'll get back together, we'll take a look at the onions to see if we're ready for the next step, which is to put our white wine and our port. Reduce that before adding our stock. So see you back here in 2 hours. We will let this continue to cook. Looks like we're close to the end of our 3 hours, so now is probably a really good time for us to take a look at our onions and see how they're doing. Let me just grab them in the back here, and hopefully you can see them. And I can even bring it up a little bit closer, but you can see how much. Oh, let's shut off the timer. That's our total of 3 hours. And you can see how nice and golden brown they are, and they've reduced quite a bit. So I think they're at a very good stage. I will give it a stir. And they look really, really nice. So now we can raise the heat. I have my stock heating up over there. I'm going to raise the heat, and I will add half of the port and half of the white wine. Reduce that. So we'll put in about half of the port, about a half a cup, and half of the white wine. So we're going to reduce this, and once it's reduced, we'll add our stock. And we'll add it about 2 cups at a time so we can see exactly how much stock we'll need based on how much onion is in the pot. So it may go anywhere from 8 to 12 cups of stock. This looks great. It's reducing very nicely. I scrape down the sides. Hopefully you can see that. It's almost completely reduced. I can really smell the port. It looks wonderful. It's pretty much reduced, so we can go ahead and add the rest of our port and our white wine. Our last half cup and our last half cup. This is where the soup is going to go into this pot. So I'm going to get the heat on and get this pot heated up. One other thing that we're going to put into our soup for flavor is it's either called a bouquet garni or a sachet, and you can usually take some cheesecloth And into the cheesecloth you would put 1 bay leaf, a couple of sprigs of fresh thyme, some parsley stem, and some peppercorns, about a half a teaspoon of black peppercorns. Tie it up with some string, and we're going to put the bouquet garni in the pot of soup. I only had a little bit of string. I did not have any cheesecloth. So in here is just some fresh thyme, parsley stems, and a bay leaf. I did not put the peppercorns because I think they would come out. So this is going to go into our soup as well. I'm just going to throw that right in the pot now. I'm going to show you that this has reduced. There's just a tiny bit of liquid left in with the onions. So now we can transfer this to our larger pot so we can add our stock. So let's get the onions in here. We'll shut this off. Now we'll add our stock 2 cups at a time so we can see how much we will need for the amount of onions that we have here. So all of our port and our white wine has completely reduced in the pot, so I can go ahead and start adding some stock. Here's our beef broth. About 3 cups there so far. Add some more stock. Looks. Maybe we can add, so I would say there's about 10 cups of stock here. So you can kind of see, hopefully, the amount of onion that I do have here to the amount of broth. You don't want it so thick that it's just onion. You want it loose enough so that there's plenty of broth and flavorful broth there, but plenty of onion for every spoonful of soup. So I would say I have about 10 cups of stock, and I think it's more than enough. I'll keep that stock on the stove, and if after my hour is up, if I feel that I need to add it, I certainly can. So let's bring this to a boil. Make sure it's at a full boil before we lower it. We'll set a timer for exactly 1 hour on a very low simmer so that it's just going to gently bubble on the top, very gently simmer. So in the meantime, let me just talk about what we will do as far as our crouton and our cheese is concerned. So I do have a couple of croutons. You can either use French bread, but you want day-old bread because you want this to be nice and dry. So this is super, super dry, very hard, which is what you're looking for. You don't want your bread to be soft. And to that, we can get this ready. And all I'm going to do is top this with some cheese, put it under our broiler or in a very hot 500-degree oven, let the cheese melt, and then we will set it right on top of our soup. So you can start with a little bit of Parmesan cheese. So we have 2 lovely croutons here, and what we'll do is we'll top it first with some grated Parmesan cheese right on the top. And you could just put Parmesan cheese if you wanted to. Just about a teaspoonful right on top. And then you can take some Gruyere cheese or Emmentaler cheese, some type of a Swiss cheese, and put the cheese directly on top of the Parmesan cheese. And then we will just put these croutons right in the oven under the broiler, and just broil it until the cheese is melted, and we'll set it right on top of the soup. So we have this all set and ready to go. You can add as much cheese as you like, but this looks like enough for me. Okay, so we'll let our soup cook and we'll be back in an hour. Well, our hour is up and our soup is ready. So the first thing you want to do is remove the bouquet garni out of the soup. And I put the croutons in the oven under the broiler, so I'm just going to check and see if they're ready for us. Here we go. So rather than putting the soup, putting the crouton on top and showering it with a lot of cheese, we're going to serve it this way, which actually is how we did it for a wedding here. Bride and groom wanted this soup for their first course, and this was the way that we served it. Okay, I just took that out of the oven. I think you can see it's nice and melted and bubbly, and it looks great. And by the way, this was the other 2 cups of stock that we did not use. So for the 10 cups of onions, for these onions, it ended up being 10 cups of stock. But it does vary depending on the onions. So it is nice to have extra. Let's just put this aside. I would say that this would definitely serve at least 6 to 8 servings here. And just take your crouton and set it right on top. Oh, that looks delicious. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you enjoy it. It's all about caramelizing, actually melting, literally melting your onions down. That gives you this wonderful rich broth, this delicious flavor. And that's a perfect French onion soup. So enjoy. See you next time. Have a great day.